Have you ever wondered why an entire book of the Bible is basically a giant family tree, followed by what seems like the most detailed construction manual ever written? Well, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into First Chronicles, and I promise you by the end of this video, you'll understand why this seemingly boring book might actually be one of the most brilliant pieces of ancient literature ever crafted. Most people skip right over Chronicles when reading through the Bible, and honestly, I get it. 9 chapters of genealogies followed by temple blueprints doesn't exactly scream page-turner. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about this book. It was written for people who had lost everything, and the author used the most unexpected tools to rebuild their entire sense of identity and purpose. Let me set the stage for you. Picture this. You're living in ancient Israel around 500 BC. Your people have just returned from 70 years of exile in Babylon. Jerusalem is in ruins, the temple is gone, and your entire way of life has been shattered. Now imagine someone hands you a scroll that starts with Adam and traces every single family line down to your present day. That's exactly what the chronicler did, and it was pure genius. The book opens with what modern readers consider the most tedious section imaginable. Chapter 1 literally begins with Adam, Seth, Enosh, and continues listing names for 9 straight chapters. But here's the key insight that changes everything. These weren't just names to the original audience. Every single name represented a connection, a heritage, a proof that despite the exile and destruction, the covenant people still existed. Think about it from their perspective. After decades in foreign lands, many questioned whether God had abandoned his promises. Were they still his chosen people? Did their lineage even matter anymore? The genealogies answered with a resounding yes. From Adam to Abraham to David to the present generation, the thread remained unbroken. The chronicler was essentially saying, look, you haven't been forgotten. Your story connects directly to the beginning of human history. But the genealogies serve another crucial purpose that most people miss. They're not random lists. They're carefully curated to emphasize specific themes. Notice how much attention is given to Judah and Benjamin, the tribes that formed the southern kingdom. The chronicler is building a case for why these particular people, these specific families, have the legitimate right to rebuild and restore Israel. The genealogies also highlight the priestly and Levitical lines in extraordinary detail. Why? Because worship was about to become central to the restored community's identity. Without a king, without political independence, the temple and its services would become the focal point of Jewish life. The chronicler is laying the groundwork for this transition. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Starting in chapter 10, we get to the narrative sections, but notice what the author does. He completely skips Saul's reign except for his death. Why? Because Saul represents the old, failed way of doing things. The chronicler wants to focus on David as the template for proper leadership and worship. The David portrayed in Chronicles is fascinating because he's presented quite differently than in Samuel and Kings. Gone are most of the messy details about his adultery with Bathsheba, his family dysfunction, and his political struggles. Instead, David is presented as the ideal king, whose primary achievement was establishing proper worship and preparing for the temple's construction. This isn't historical revisionism, it's purposeful emphasis. The chronicler isn't trying to whitewash David's character, he's highlighting the aspects of David's reign that the post-exilic community needs to emulate. David's heart for worship, his organizational skills, his passion for God's house, these are the qualities the rebuilding community desperately needs. The temple preparation narrative that dominates the middle section of the book serves multiple functions. First, it demonstrates that even though David couldn't build the temple himself, his preparations were so thorough that Solomon essentially just had to execute the plan. Second, it shows the incredible resources David accumulated for God's house, sending a clear message about priorities and sacrifice. But here's the deeper layer that's absolutely brilliant. By spending so much time on temple preparations and later on temple service organization, the chronicler is creating a manual for the restored community. Remember, They're trying to rebuild not just physical structures, but an entire religious system. The detailed descriptions of duties, responsibilities, and procedures serve as a practical guide. The emphasis on music and worship throughout Chronicles is particularly significant. David is portrayed as not just a warrior king, but as a master worship leader who established choirs, appointed musicians, and created a system of praise that would continue for generations. For a community trying to restore their identity through worship, these examples become incredibly relevant. Solomon's reign gets significant coverage, but again, notice the selective focus. The chronicler emphasizes the temple construction and dedication while minimizing Solomon's later failures. The temple dedication ceremony in particular receives extensive treatment because it represents the pinnacle of proper worship and God's blessing on his people. The books of Chronicles also introduce us to prophets and their messages that aren't found elsewhere in Scripture. These prophetic voices consistently deliver the same message. Faithfulness brings blessing. Unfaithfulness brings disaster. This isn't just historical reporting, it's a warning and encouragement to the post-exilic community. One of the most powerful aspects of Chronicles is how it reframes the monarchy period. Instead of focusing on political achievements or failures, the chronicler evaluates every king based on their relationship to the temple and proper worship. Kings who supported the temple and maintained proper religious practices are praised, while those who neglected or corrupted worship are condemned. This creates a completely different understanding of what makes a leader successful. It's not military conquest or economic prosperity that matters most, it's spiritual leadership and commitment to God's ways. For a community without political independence, this message is both comforting and challenging. The genealogies that seemed so boring at the beginning now make perfect sense in light of the entire book's message. They establish that the people have an unbroken connection to God's promises. The narrative sections show how those promises were fulfilled through David and Solomon. And the emphasis on worship and temple service provides a roadmap for living faithfully in the present. Chronicles ends with Cyrus's decree allowing the exiles to return and rebuild the temple. This ending is incredibly significant because it connects the entire historical narrative to the present moment of the original readers. They are living in the fulfillment of this decree, charged with the responsibility of rebuilding not just physical structures, but an entire way of life centered on worship. What makes Chronicles absolutely brilliant is how it takes a traumatized, displaced people and gives them exactly what they need: identity, purpose, and hope. The genealogies provide identity by connecting them to their heritage. The emphasis on worship and temple service provides purpose by showing them how to live faithfully in their current circumstances. And the overall narrative provides hope by demonstrating that God keeps his promises even through judgment and exile. So the next time you're tempted to skip over Chronicles, remember that you're looking at one of the most sophisticated works of ancient literature ever created. It's not just history, it's therapy. It's not just genealogy, it's identity restoration. And it's not just temple instructions, it's a practical guide for rebuilding a relationship with God after everything has fallen apart. The King James Bible's First Chronicles reminds us that sometimes the most important stories aren't the most exciting ones, but they're exactly what we need to hear when our world falls apart and we need to remember who we are.